coming up, a game winner for the Pistons against the champs, and absolute chaos between the Bucks and Raptors. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA, local experts going over the biggest stories on the hardwood. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. A breakdown of the final play of the game allowed Saddiq Bey to play hero for Detroit with a buzzer beater to win it against Golden State. Locked On Warriors and Locked On Pistons go over the game that went down to the final seconds.
This time, the Warriors were the victims of a buzzer-beating shot at Chase Center. What a brutal game for Dub Nation. I'm Cyrus Sauces with your Locked On Warriors, Locked On Now recap of the Warriors' 5-game winning streak, all at home, snapped by the Detroit Pistons, 122-119. Klay Thompson hit a game-tying three-pointer with 1 second remaining. That led most people to speculate this game was probably going to overtime. But with 1 second remaining, the Pistons inbound the ball to Saddiq Bey, who puts up a game-winning buzzer beater to win by 3, 122-119. Making it even more peculiar is that Draymond Green was ejected from the game with 2 technicals. Kevin Durant joins me tomorrow to break it all down. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs.
Saddiq Bey with a game-winning 3 against the Golden State Warriors at their house. What a fantastic shot from Saddiq Bey. Holy crap. Host of the Locked On Pistons podcast here, Kuka Hill here. The Pistons controlled this game for the majority of the game until the fourth quarter came around. And Golden State really had a few runs, even took the lead in this fourth quarter, but the Pistons answered on the final defensive possession. Stu and Saddiq Bey both got caught ball watching, and Klay Thompson was able to hit a crazy 3, just beautiful shot from him. And to tie the game with 1 second left, Pistons come out of timeout, go to run a play for Bojan Bogdanovic to get him the ball in the corner. They covered that. Killian's forced to throw it into Saddiq Bey, and Saddiq Bey takes a wild fadeaway shot with 1 second left and hits all net. Sends the Golden State Warriors back to their home, back to their locker room with an L. Fantastic shot from Saddiq Bey. He played well off the bench. Burks played well off the bench. Killian dished it out in his return. This was a really good win that the Pistons needed as a team.
Another game winner last night, Evan Mobley knocking down a shot with less than 5 seconds to go to give Cleveland a low-scoring win against Phoenix. Locked On Suns goes over that late loss.
Everything was going right for the Phoenix Suns until it wasn't. Brendan Clean here from Locked On Suns, coming to you after a 90-88 last-second loss by the Suns in Cleveland. A Donovan Mitchell 3 at the very end. A lot of inopportune misses mean that the Suns waste a 25-point performance from Chris Paul, a 15 and 18 game from DeAndre Ayton, and a matchup in which they held Cleveland, who had just had a 71-point scorer scored deep into the hundreds in their last game, held them to 90 points, and yet still a loss. 4 straight for the Suns now, and it's hard not to call this one of the more disappointing games of this road trip, of this losing streak. You cannot waste a game when Chris Paul finally looks like himself again. You can't. For more on these Suns, listen to Locked On Suns wherever you get podcasts.
The Pacers had a lead late against the Joel Embiid-less 76ers team, but could not hold on and ended up losing it in overtime. Locked On Pacers goes over what went wrong late for Indiana.
Tough loss for the Indiana Pacers in Philadelphia. I'm Tony East, the host of Locked On Pacers, here to tell you about the Pacers' loss in the city of brotherly love. Overtime, a 129-126 win for the Sixers, and the Sixers were up 13 in the fourth quarter. It looked like they were going to run away with this one. They were playing much better than the Pacers in much of the second and third quarter. And yet here come the Pacers in the fourth. They've been such a good fourth quarter team of late, and they were again in this game, outscoring Philly 36-23 in the final frame, and it looked like they had it with less than a minute to go. Pacers lead by 4 with under 30 seconds to go. They were up 2 with less than 10 seconds to go. They were still winning, but 2 costly turnovers in the final minute give the Sixers 4 easy points. It gets to overtime, and James Harden and the Sixers find a way to get it done. Pacers had no answers for Harden, even with Embiid out. James Harden finishes with 26 points and 8 assists, and the Pacers, despite good games from a couple key starters, couldn't get it done. We'll break down this game and more on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
A bizarre game all around for Milwaukee and Toronto. Got pushed to overtime before we got a final, and Locked On Raptors and Bucks try to make sense of all the madness.
Blazers falter down the stretch and lose to the Timberwolves to kick off a 3-game road trip. I'm Mike Richmond, host of Locked On Blazers, and Portland struggled for most of the night, but they were within 2 points with 3.5 minutes left and missed good looks from deep. A chance to take the lead, a chance to cut into the lead, and a chance to keep themselves afloat, and they missed all of them. It's becoming a trend for them. Down the stretch against quality competition, their offense is sputtering a little bit. The clutch gene that sparked their early season success has gone missing since the middle of November. It's a problem for them. They're a team that's got to score to win, and right now, down the stretch, they're just not scoring. Listen to Locked On Blazers for more.
The Bucks beat the Toronto Raptors in one of the most absurd games of basketball you will ever see this season. My name's Kane Pittman. I'm the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. I'm not sure what number you want to point to the most for one of the craziest games of basketball you've ever seen. Milwaukee had 25 turnovers in this game. Milwaukee also out-rebounded the Toronto Raptors 73-47. Toronto, mostly due to those Milwaukee turnovers, had 28 more field goal attempts and scored 101 points from 116 shots. This game was a mess. The Bucks were leading by 21 points with 4 minutes to go, and it still went to overtime. In the end, though, it finished with an absurd Giannis pass to Grayson Allen in the corner. Allen knocks down the three. The Bucks win. Giannis finishes with a 30-point, 20-rebound, 10-assist, triple-double, 24 hours after scoring 55 points. This game was crazy. This game was nuts. I'm not sure anyone ever wants to watch it again, but for the Bucks to win on the road, on a back-to-back without Chris, Drew, Joe Ingles, you take it, you get out of there, and you move on.
The Pelicans once again playing without their star power, but they're still finding ways to get wins. Locked On Pelicans goes over the names that you need to know after a victory over Houston.
The Pelicans' depth again gets them a win while they are shorthanded without Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. But now the true test begins. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans and Locked On NBA. With both Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram sidelined for the Pelicans, you wouldn't expect New Orleans to lead by as many as 31 points. But that's exactly what they did against the Houston Rockets. 4 of the 5 Pelicans starters scored in double digits. Guys like Najee Marshall and Trey Murphy continue to step up. You also had Billy Hernangomez and Jose Alvarado coming off the bench to really lift New Orleans. But it's one thing to do it against the 10-win Houston Rockets. It's another to do it against teams like Dallas, Boston, and Miami on the road. With Zion out at least 3 weeks and likely longer, and no return date set yet for Brandon Ingram, I've said before the Pelicans might be the deepest team in the league, but now we're really going to find out.
Coming up, the Hawks snap their losing streak, and the Knicks hold off the Spurs. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by BetOnline, the #1 spot for all of your online sports betting needs. You can get the latest odds and trends, especially now with football heading into the postseason soon. Whatever sport you like to bet on, you can do that at betonline.net. It's where the game starts. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you once again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Grizzlies traveled to the East Coast to hand the Hornets their 14th loss in their last 17 games. Locked On Grizzlies recaps an easy win for Memphis.
All it took for the Memphis Grizzlies starting lineup to look the very best it has all season long is to play the hapless Charlotte Hornets on a weekday. Let's make this happen more consistently. Can you help me out, NBA? Make this work for us here in Memphis. It would be much appreciated. I'm Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies, and all 4 of Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Desmond Bane scored 15 or more points in a pretty easy effort against a Hornets team that was down several of its own key players. And even when those guys are on the floor, they're one of the worst teams in the National Basketball Association. It was a professional win for the Memphis Grizzlies. And that's a nice thing to see from this team entering 2023, to go out on the road and pick up the victories that they have to get if they plan on staying atop the Western Conference amid all the parity that currently exists out west. So the Grizzlies pick up a much-needed professional victory tonight in Charlotte.
The Knicks are once again making things much harder than they really need to be against the San Antonio Spurs. New York did get a win this time, and Locked On Knicks says much of that is thanks to Jalen Brunson.
And it can never just be easy for the New York Knicks. A 117-114 victory over the San Antonio Spurs. A career-high 38 points for Jalen Brunson was just enough for the Knicks to avoid a second embarrassing loss to San Antonio, arguably the worst team in the league in just a week. What's up, guys? I'm Gavin Shaw, Locked On Knicks. Brunson hit 2 clutch jumpers down the stretch. The Knicks were, after some defensive struggles, fantastic in the closing 20 seconds as they forced a 5-second violation on a Jeremy Sohan inbound. And then Quentin Grimes, some great defensive instincts peeling off of Doug McDermott to get a contest on Keldon Johnson and ensure that he didn't get a game-tying shot off at the buzzer. But this night was all about Brunson hitting from 3, some brilliant passes, including a slip to Quentin Grimes cutting to the basket before the end of a shot clock, and just flashing some insane footwork, both around the rim and at the elbow. A virtuoso performance. The Knicks escape.
Minnesota crediting their defense with helping them hold off the Trailblazers for a win on Wednesday. Locked On Timberwolves and Locked On Trailblazers have everything that you need to know post-game.
Anthony Edwards dropped 32 points as the Timberwolves won for a second consecutive game, defeating the Portland Trailblazers by 7 on Wednesday night. I'm Ben Beacon, host of the Locked On Wolves podcast, and this was all about the Timberwolves' defensive game plan, especially early in the game against Portland. Damian Lillard had fantastic games against the Wolves. Both times they played against Portland in Portland a couple of weeks ago. This time around, Dame and Anthony Simons combined to score just 11 points in the first half as the Wolves really mucked things up on the defensive end of the floor. And when Portland answered back in the third quarter, which has often been a difficult frame for the Wolves pushed back themselves in the fourth. Luka Garza had a big first quarter. Anthony Edwards had a big fourth quarter. And Taurean Prince, in his first game back after missing 20 games with a shoulder injury, was big off the bench for the Wolves, hitting a couple of big shots, scoring 11 points, and playing really strong defense. This was an all-around solid win for the Wolves. We'll break it all down on the post-game podcast. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Wolves for all things Timberwolves.
Blazers falter down the stretch and lose to the Timberwolves to kick off a 3-game road trip. I'm Mike Richmond, host of Locked On Blazers, and Portland struggled for most of the night, but they were within 2 points with 3.5 minutes left and missed good looks from deep. A chance to take the lead, a chance to cut into the lead, and a chance to keep themselves afloat, and they missed all of them. It's becoming a trend for them. Down the stretch against quality competition, their offense is sputtering a little bit. The clutch gene that sparked their early season success has gone missing since the middle of November. It's a problem for them. They're a team that's got to score to win, and right now, down the stretch, they're just not scoring. Listen to Locked On Blazers for more.
The Hawks were able to salvage a win and snap their losing streak on the road against the Kings last night. Locked On Hawks is in with all the details.
Hello, friends. My name is Brad Rowland, and the Atlanta Hawks have stopped a 4-game losing streak. They go into Sacramento and almost lose a heartbreaker yet again. The Hawks have had all kinds of ugly losses in the last few weeks, but this one, they pull out of the fire down by 4 with 75 seconds to go. And a few big plays. Trae Young, 3-point play, and then DeJounte Murray was the hero of the evening with a steal, a walk-off, some free throws, everything going in the mix for DeJounte Murray at the end of this game. But it was a balanced effort from the Hawks. They had 5 guys with 17 points or more, 4 guys in 20 points or higher. And by the way, that's 2 games in a row for that. The first time since 1969 that the Hawks have done that with 4 scorers of 20-plus points in back-to-back games. All told, an offense first game for the Hawks for sure. Defense was just okay in this one, but they were able to get enough of basically getting to the rim in this contest, taking advantage of Sacramento's weak points around the rim and holding on for dear life in the final seconds. We'll have a full breakdown of this game and more on the Locked On Hawks podcast.
The Magic able to utilize a couple of days of rest to recharge themselves and come out with their best effort last night against the Thunder. Locked On Magic is happy with what he's seeing in Orlando.
This is Philip Rossman-Reich, the host of Locked On Magic, and the Orlando Magic took advantage of their rest, got their reset, and played a fantastic game to defeat the Oklahoma City Thunder here at the Amway Center. We all know the Oklahoma City Thunder are a team that loves to get in the paint. The Orlando Magic defensively are a team that tries to prevent points in the paint, and that was really the focus in practice over the last 2 days as the Magic had 4 days off over the New Year to get themselves right after a 3-game losing streak. They certainly did, holding the Thunder to 30 points in the paint. Defense is really the catalyst for this team. When they were playing well during the win streak a couple weeks ago. They were playing some fantastic defense, especially in the paint. This game, even down several players, including Franz Wagner, because of the suspensions from last week's game, they were dialed in defensively. Certainly having the energy because of a couple days off helps, and the Oklahoma City Thunder coming off of a back-to-back in OKC last night certainly helps things. There's no doubt about that. This was a bit of a schedule loss for the Thunder, but the Magic played some exceptional basketball, and Paolo Banchero was fantastic as well down the stretch to ice the game and put it away.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Now make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NBA and your favorite team's Locked On podcast right here on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.